Get a job. That's what our parents used to say every summer. These days, the job of getting a job is much different than it was in the 1980s. A whole host of technologies have revolutionized hiring, ideally improving what's called the candidate experience. Two professionals who know all about that are Stephen Lucas, CEO, and Tracy Edkins, CHRO for iSIMS.
The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness Future Proof.
Your host here, Eric Kavanagh. And folks, I am super psyched today to have a couple of real rock stars on the call. People who are paving the way for this new generation of workers who are changing the world for the better in this information economy. So crazy things are happening in the world today, but it's very, very exciting. And we're going to be talking to none other than Stephen Lucas, CEO of iSIMS, and Tracy Edkins, CHRO, and also the head of their advisory council for hiring, which is pretty cool stuff. And we're going to talk about hiring, attracting, retaining the best talent. How do you do that? So we all know what job boards are. I've used Indeed. I remember Monster.com when they advertised in the Super Bowl. That was kind of the beginning of this whole revolution around hiring practice and how you find the right people. And these days, it's a remarkably sophisticated process. It's kind of amazing if you get right down to it. If you want to hire someone, I go on Indeed sometimes and post ads for like radio salespeople. In 2 hours, I have 400 people coming in wanting the job. But are they the best people, really? You have to spend a lot of time working through that. So how do you find the right people? Well, iSIMS is the company. It's ICIMS.com. Look these folks up. They figured out how to orchestrate the entire process, the end-to-end process of finding, attracting, if you will, hiring, and retaining the best talent. And folks, there's a lot of talk about technology these days. Of course, this show talks all about analytics, big data, cloud, digital transformation, which is really hot in the COVID era for sure. I've talked before about how we had Carl Hightower, CDO of Novant Health, on this show last year, who told me they knocked out 5 years of roadmap in 5 months for digital transformation because of COVID. So COVID has taught us a lot of lessons. We've learned to use Zoom, quite frankly. We even use it for our radio shows these days. We've learned to be much more strategic and much more thoughtful about what we do and how we do it. We know not to take change interfaces for granted, quite frankly. So we take things seriously. That's what it's all about these days. And I do want to talk about, though, the fact that people make companies great. If you get right down to it, it's not the technology. There may be good technology they leverage, but it's always going to be the people who make great companies. And the people who stick around, that's the ideal, because these days we're in an era of so much sophistication and so much specialization. It can be hard to find the right people, but then again, people can learn and they can grow into your organization. So there's a lot to consider here. And let's dive right in with Tracy Edkins, CHRO for iSIMS. Tracy, tell us a bit about yourself and what you folks are doing at iSIMS to really revolutionize and modernize the whole hiring practice.
Happy to. Happy to be here, Eric. So my name's Tracy, and I'm a 25-year veteran of HR. A big believer that talent is the biggest differentiator for success in companies. And I've had the privilege of working with iSIMS for about 6 months now, leading up their advisory board from a CHRO perspective, partnering with Steve and the team as we think about what's happening in the world of applicant tracking systems, what's happening in the world of recruiting, especially in this time of COVID, and as we think about what does post-COVID look like, and really how are we leveraging technology to make this process better, simpler, smoother, more aligned to the demands of that we face today, and how do you find the unfindable? How do you find the people that are going to be the best contributors to your organization? And it's been a very, very exciting journey.
Yeah, so let's kind of talk about that real quick. Obviously, you want to find the right people. And once you find the right people, you want to retain those people. But it's very hard if you have 1,000 people applying for a particular job. How do you get through all that and separate the wheat from the chaff? What are some of the key learnings that you've come across while working with iSIMS?
Well, I think one of the things that we're really leveraging is how do you have a complete end-to-end experience that is seamless. You don't want to have a situation where prospective employees don't feel like they're being treated like gold. I always compare the recruiting process. You don't hear many people in HR encourage dating analogies, but to me, it's a lot like dating. Your employees that you're looking at have so many choices, and when they're checking out your company, they're probably going on first dates with 3 or 4 other companies at the same time. So you want to have a very seamless, very clear, very transparent experience so that you understand where you are in the process at all times, and that you have a sense right from the beginning of what it's going to be like if you decide to hitch your wagon to this company.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because all it takes is one bad conversation in the process to throw the whole thing off, right? One bad apple spoils the bunch. We're only as strong as the weakest link, all that kind of stuff. So it sounds to me like you really work with your clients to help them understand the importance of getting everything right from the start all the way through the finish. Is that about right?
That's exactly right. How do you make sure that everybody who touches the process, not just the person being interviewed, but the recruiting people, the hiring manager, the people who are going to work with that individual, how do we make sure that they're all in sync?
How do you work with recruiters? Because they're such a huge part of the network these days. And to me, recruiters are a lot like realtors, in that if you get a good one, they're amazing, they're dynamite. There are lots kind of in the middle who are really just there to get some money and are not going to be a value-added component of the process, right? So what are your practices for identifying and nurturing the best recruiters as part of your process?
It's a great question. One of the things that we've seen is that the recruiters who are really good at what they do want to be the superheroes in the organization. They want to be the ones that are finding the unfindable, really delivering the best talent to those hiring managers. And they also care a lot about removing bias in the process, and how do you make sure that it's an inclusive experience. And through a platform like iCIMS, they're able to be those superheroes.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I'll throw one more question at you before we bring the big guns in here. Stephen Lucas waiting patiently in the wings. But I have heard many stories about how long it takes to get through processes. And it's interesting. I've seen vast disparities from one industry to another. In the enterprise software world, for example, in the marketing department, I'll hear stories of people who go through 15, 16, 17 interviews to get a single job. To me, that sounds like overkill. And then I've heard of people who just have one call and they're hired, right? Is there a happy medium somewhere? What are your thoughts around that?
It's a great question. I do think there is a happy medium, and we've experimented a lot with how do you kind of get through. Speed is important, but it's not your only consideration. But once you've interviewed 16, 17 people, you're probably working with a system that could use a product like iCIMS to help you be much more efficient.
That's a good point. Well, speaking of that, let's bring in Stephen Lucas, CEO over there at iCIMS, former president, SAP, former CEO of Marketo. So a real visionary in the field. Stephen, what brought you to iCIMS, and what have you done since you got there?
Well, what brought me here is iCIMS is solving a big problem for a lot of companies. In fact, nearly every company on the planet, which is how do we find amazing talent? And by the way, do that at scale. It's hard enough to hire one talented person. Try hiring, as you alluded to, 100 or 1,000 a year, or for a lot of our larger customers, 50,000. This is not a simple challenge. And you have applicants and candidates and recruiters and hiring managers and interview teams, and you have to orchestrate all that activity and somehow produce a fantastic candidate experience. And if you don't, Eric, you called out 1,000 people applying for one job. Those 999, if you don't respond to them, if you treat them poorly, they're not going to buy your product. And those people go on to become buyers. And so you got to think about your employer brand. You got to think about the process, not just the talent. But it's an exciting challenge, and it's one that we think about it. And the why, my career led me here is having worked at Salesforce and Marketo and the like. I've seen this pipeline or funnel technology. Salesforce is synonymous with CRM and Salesforce automation. They're the revenue funnel. That's what they are. When you don't sit there and go, who should I use to help me manage my sales? You just go, oh yeah, it's Salesforce.com. And Marketo, in B2B marketing, the de facto, and they were acquired by Adobe, so now by default Adobe. But you don't sit around and go, gosh, I wish there was a technology to help me generate leads and manage the lead pipeline. But think about your talent and hiring experience. The last time somebody listening interviewed someone, it was like, hey, here's a Word document, a Zoom link, knock yourself out. Then you get an email afterwards that's like, so how'd it go? That is not a scalable process. Could you imagine running your sales cycles that way? Is like sending an email, to a customer like, hey, so how'd it go? Like, there's a sophisticated system to scale it, and we have that. And I think organizations, companies are just realizing now, oh, this human or talent funnel, this is the pipeline that matters. So that's why I'm here.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And as I'm talking to you folks, I'm thinking to myself that really you want that whole part of your organization to reflect your culture and your values. And I'm guessing that one of the tricks is every person you interview, you treat them as if they're an employee already.
Yes.
Right? You don't treat them as someone who has to, climb up a wall face to get into your castle, right?
Treating a candidate like a customer is the mantra here at iCIMS. If you treat a candidate like a customer, and that means the technology investment that goes into that. It means the care and attention. It means a profile of the candidate, like you'd have a profile of a customer, so you understand their needs and wants. You treat a candidate like a customer, and I'm pretty sure Tracy knows this in her, tenure as a people executive. When you do that, you win. And even if you say, to the candidate, like, hey, we're going to pass and go with somebody else, if they've been treated with care, that they remember that for a lifetime.
Talking all about talent, finding and retaining the best talent. We've got Tracy Atkins and Steve Lucas online from iCIMS. It's ICIMS.com. Very cool company, revolutionizing the hiring process, but also retention. And what got me excited in the first segment there, I'll throw it over to Tracy, is just from my own understanding of what you're providing and where you're going and what you're doing, it seems to me like this is a fantastic technology and process. It's not just tech, but it's a process it's a methodology built around the platform for understanding culture and your company's culture. And I bring this up, I'll give a quick example. USAA, I have USAA, I've had them for years. Every single time I call that company, every single time I have a positive experience. I cannot say that for any other company I've ever encountered. Every single time it's a positive experience. They've got something going on with the culture where they get the right people, they keep the right people. When someone does the wrong thing, they get rid of that person. There's stuff that you have to do. Sometimes it's unpleasant in HR, but to me, that's a beautiful example of a great company that has a fantastic culture. If you would, Tracy, talk about the importance of culture and how you folks can help companies, number one, understand what their culture is, but number two, really build upon it.
Absolutely. Your culture is in essence your people. And so leveraging technology to make sure that you're doing the recruiting process well is really important. And culture is a hot topic. It always has been, but I find myself having conversations now with CEOs who wake up one day and they're just not happy with where their culture has moved to. And the conversations I have is that is, you can change it. There are things you can do. A culture is constantly changing and evolving. And in my opinion, you should always have a point of view on what you love about your culture and what you're trying to protect and what you're trying to evolve on the fringe.
Yeah, and I think everybody listening is probably thinking the same thing, which is, well, my culture is pretty different post, COVID right now, or, in the middle of the pandemic. You could have, I ask people frequently, like, hey, what'd you love about your culture? And the answer is kind of pre versus post COVID, radically different. And everyone is experiencing this in different ways. Here at iCIMS, first of all, the cultural definition of who I think we are, I think we're humble but hungry is who we are. Now, for us, the humility comes from, look, it's software. The word soft is in the name. So it's malleable. Sometimes it doesn't work as perfectly as we would like it to. It should be constantly evolving. It's not rigid. That's what I talk to people about when I say, you're in the software industry. The reality is, though, hungry because we got a lot of work to do. We're never going to get everything right. And we are in this unique world where science meets human emotion. It's HR, that's what it's all about. And recruiting all the more so. You're not selling someone on a product that if they dislike it, they can just stop using it or turning up. This is their livelihood. Their family is involved, their careers. So we talk about, like iCIMS kind of working like a Salesforce or a Marketo, and then it's a pipeline. Well, yeah, but then feelings come in as well. And you have to be very deeply connected to the human experience. And that's why we talk about this being a system of engagement. Are you as a company engaged with your people or who you're hiring and bringing into your organization? That's on the one side. On the other side, iCIMS, we started out, as you called out, Eric, as a company that will help you find and hire great people. But over time, we found out, guess what? And this is all the more so in the pandemic, is you got to hang on to your great talent. This war for talent is real. The extraordinary compensation, benefits, perks that, you know, the extent that companies are willing to go to now to hang on to talent is extraordinary. But there's one thing, one little secret above all else that will help you hang on to your talent. It's called a career path. People feel like, hey, guess what? Somebody knows who I am. They understand my skills and competencies and capabilities and experiences, and I'm getting job opportunities internally. They're not going to leave. So one of the things that we focused on, especially starting a year ago, is this notion of internal mobility. The talent marketplace I talked about earlier, that has to be a place where, as an employee, I can go to an internal site and it will tell me, hey, guess what, Steve? Here's 5 jobs that you qualify for. Would you like to meet the manager? That is an incredibly important experience. And conversely, hiring managers, they need to know who are all the experienced people in your organization. And I guarantee you, again, think about the last time you got hired. What's the most information that you punched into your HCM system? Your birthday and job title, maybe your dependents. That's it. That's all the company knows about you, and the rest is based on hope. You need, your company needs a skill profile of who you are. What are your capabilities, your hopes, your wants, your dreams, your competencies? That we call that a dynamic candidate profile. And we use AI to help show employees and managers, guess what? You two ought to be talking to each other. And then the last thing, Eric, we just introduced, I wasn't even thinking about this a year ago, is gigs. We were like full-time, part-time, which one do you want? Most companies now that we work with, they're also providing internal gigs, the 5 hours of work per week that I could go totally on a different team and contribute my expertise to. That might result in a new opportunity for me. Gigs is one of the fastest growing areas of our product offering.
That's very cool. That's very encouraging too, and I'll throw this over to Tracy. I think Steve just brought up such an excellent point, which is that, most people, they want to be engaged, they want to be active, they want to be challenged. You don't want some really boring job. And if you think about AI, I'm a media guy, so I will tell you, in my opinion, the narrative is just dead wrong on AI. The narrative in the mainstream media seems to be, oh, it's going to take jobs away, it's a bad thing, blah, blah, blah. Total nonsense. AI is so good at so many things that humans just aren't geared to do. Frankly, one is just crunching through massive amounts of data. 2 is looking for really complex patterns that are just not going to be visible to the naked eye. And 3 is also what he was just talking about, which is aligning. And I think that if you have a mechanism in your organization, if you're 1,000 employees or more, for sure, because it's a pretty significant size at that point, to where you're paying attention to who's doing what at some strategic level and alerting folks to opportunities, that's a big deal.
I totally agree. I think that talent management has been a really tough nut for companies to crack. And it gets even harder the bigger they are, because people start to not have the visibility. And there's a lot inside of this. You can think a lot about how different generations approach work differently as well. And Steve talking about the gig economy, that speaks to early in career. They want to be able to do it. They're not interested in tying their horse to a wagon forever. They want to know, what am I going to get? What are the skills that I'm going to get? And with iCIMS, this ability to really track your talent and approach them with these opportunities that match them and connect them to the right opportunities, it's a game changer. Every company is trying to do this, but they really struggle on how. And the common joke is that people will say, oh, I have to leave. It would be easier for me to find my ideal job in this company if I applied from outside versus in. And that's, not only is that sad, like that actually hurts my heart to think that that's true for some employees, that is so costly.
Yeah. No, that's right.
I have to call this out, Tracy, because you're absolutely right. personal experience on this, and this is not about, me, like, I think we all have this experience. This is not me tooting my own horn. I remember, I won't name the company, but sitting there going, I was, I don't even remember what my title was, like VP of something. And at the time, I felt a little humble ask was, I said, look, I would really love to find a way to be an SVP at this company someday. Wouldn't that be terrific? I remember the words of that manager when that person said to me, well, Steve, that's just not going to happen in the next several years. It's just not. You need to focus on what you're doing. 1 month later, I left and I got my SVP job. And admittedly, okay, I was fixated on the title, and it was like, it wasn't like the sun was shining and birds were flying after that, but it was, if you got to leave, this is not about me, but if your great talent has to leave, and it's not all about titles, but it is about opportunity. And if you can't advertise that opportunity to your own employees, then what the heck? Like, why work so hard to win these great employees, to just let them out the door because you can't put opportunity in front of them? And then the irony is, most customers we talk to, they still have like 500 open headcount. They're like, gosh, we just can't fill these. I'm like, well, you wouldn't need to, never mind,
It's really cool too, and why I think, Steve, you wound up in another great place here, just because of your talents and your skills and your background and where we are in the world today, is that digital transformation is everywhere. And I'll throw this over to Tracy real quick. Almost every job that can be done right now is being either amended or disrupted or in some way changed by digital transformation, by technologies that are available. You can rent analytics, for crying out loud. You can use alternative data. There are all these new business models spinning up. If you look at all the latest IPOs, they're all cloud-born technologies that found some little niche that they really exploited and did extremely well. And so the cool thing from a sort of career path perspective is that now there are all kinds of ways that people can grow their careers, whether it's to be a better manager or whether it's to leverage new technologies or find new ways to do business. There are so many cool things that you can do right now that you could not have done reasonably 10 years ago. But what do you think about that, Tracy?
I totally agree. I love this topic, and I totally believe that digital transformation is really more about the people than the technology. If you think about our educational institutions, they can't keep up. They can't give us the skills that we need in the time that we need them. So from a recruiting perspective, you need to have systems in place where you're hiring people who are curious, who have a growth mindset, who are constantly challenging and flexible and growing. Those are the people that have job security, because they're the ones who are figuring out, you can have the best technology in the world, but if your people don't know how to flex it to your business, to your customer, to your environment, then it's probably not going to work. And we see that all the time.
And in the break there, Steve, you were talking about a call you had just today, all about management and managers and what to expect from them. And I'd mentioned to you that, in my opinion, if you have good managers, you have good culture. It's really the most important job you can have. And it's a difficult thing to do, especially for people who produce, people who do very well in their role. It's not so easy to pivot and suddenly be the one who's trying to nurture others. But talk about that for a second, Steve.
Yeah, I think there's two sides to that coin. I think there's the, how do you develop the team that you've got on the field already? And, in any business, you can't just say, well, I don't like that team, so I'll just go get a new team. You got a game to play, and it's called running the business. But, what I share with our team is, look, it's always hard to make the transition from getting the trophies to giving them. And that was some advice. Actually, the 10 seconds of background, that's advice that my grandfather, who he lived in North Carolina, owned a chain of bowling alleys. His name was Art, and they called him the Art of Bowling. So that's where this tidbit comes from. But he would say, you got to make the switch, Steve, from getting the trophies to giving them. And that's easy to say, but it's hard to do. It's not just about showering your employees or future managers with praise, or saying, hey, just because you want to be a manager doesn't mean you should be. It's about how do you move away from needing recognition yourself to realizing that the recognition you get is the success of the people that work for you. So that transition's hard. That's one thing. I will say though, 99 times out of 100, when I'm talking with CEOs about changing culture, growing their team, it all starts at the top of the talent funnel, is who are you bringing in? And that's normally the last place people look, when it should be the first place you look, is who's walking in the door to your company. And that old adage of, hey, if you're hiring 6 and 7s, guess what? They only hire 4s and 5s. And I hate to kind of distill people down to a number, but it's true. You know, look, without sounding harsh, mediocre talent doesn't go out and hire great talent. It doesn't work that way. And so you've got to hold yourself to that 8 or 9 standard. If you do that at the top of your talent funnel, and that's what we do, is help companies not just find, but hire the 8s and 9s, then that is what is pervasive. And so you change what you're dealing with downstream. And I know, you know, a lot of people have seen that, but it fundamentally should start with, who am I bringing in the door?
Those are good. That's a good mantra too. And as I'm thinking about this, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I know from what I've seen in organizations, from what we've seen ourselves, when you lose someone, especially a talented person, that's a hole that you almost can't even fill. I mean, you almost have to start thinking, okay, how do we reinvent this now? Because that person, especially that superstar who was there for 5, 10, 15 years, when they leave, you can't just go find a copy of them and put that in that slot. Now you have to find a new person. And that, to Stephen's point, that's why you really want to understand who is working with you now. How can those people be fostered and nurtured to build the company? And then you hire other folks, right? So it really does speak to the power of knowing who your team is and caring about them. And then the managers spend time thinking about that stuff, right, Tracy?
Absolutely. And the other piece, you know, retention is costly on its own right, because it's hard to replace that talent and all the knowledge and the IP that they had. But you know what? When those people that were great to work with and did good work go somewhere, people follow them. And so that one departure can actually turn out to be 5, 10, 15, 20 departures. And so if you, through effective management of your talent, understanding what they're good at, and being proactive at putting opportunities in front of them, which sadly just doesn't happen that often, you can actually prevent that one person from leaving, which could actually have affected 15, 20 others.
Yeah, and I think that's a bit of a hard pill for some people to swallow, because it is hypothetical and it's hard to look beyond the reality of today to really appreciate what it would be like if this person left, right, Steve? So I think the key is, again, to get back to programs in your organization, not just training, but education and opportunities, and just talking to people, spending that quality time that isn't just, have you done your job today kind of thing, right? It's you want to have that deeper, richer relationship with your whole team. And then culturally, that just grows and builds from there, right, Steve?
It does. And look, if you're not doing it today, then tomorrow's a really good time to start. There is a coming storm on the horizon. And that storm is post-pandemic. When we get out of this thing, and we're going to get out of this thing whenever the thing is not a thing. And, you know, and I think that we're starting to see, at least here in the US, you know, vaccinations pick up, and that's a good thing and very encouraging. When employers, and I'm not just talking about tech where you can do this over Zoom, when employers in general start providing unprecedented levels of flexibility, where you can work, the time you can work, do you want to do it remotely or in person or flex, and the list goes on and on. And that world of change, it is here and we don't yet recognize it. But when you're, or anybody listening, you're competing in a world where an employer is saying, hey, you know what? You can work from anywhere. I don't care. And you're the company saying, hey, you got to work in the office 24/7. That's just the deal. You're going to lose. Now, the only way that you'll win is if you have that connectivity back to your people, your culture, and your team. So that connectivity tissue that Tracy's talking about, that's really it, right? We're going to live in a world that's going to be hyper fractured and hyper flexible going forward. So you've got to build these kind of cultural aspects, the connectivity tissue to your teams, because if you don't have that, then you're purely competing on if somebody can, you know, like talent can work remote. You don't want to be in that world.